Welcome to Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle. I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is a show all about music, music production, and the music business. This week is dedicated to the memory of legendary guitarist, singer, songwriter, producer, and film and television composer Wayne Kramer, who passed away last week. Wayne was far more influential than many realize, as his band MC5 basically invented punk rock a full decade before it even emerged as a genre. The band and its albums became a model for punk rock bands on both sides of the Atlantic. In fact, The Clash even wrote not one, but two songs about him. A formidable player, Rolling Stone magazine ranked Wayne as one of the 100 greatest guitar players of all time. He also collaborated with the who's who of rock's most elite artists over the years, and his scoring work can be heard on films like Talladega Nights, Step Brothers, the HBO comedy series Eastbound Down, ESPN's 54321, In My Words, and Under the Lights, and even the Unlabeled Jim Beam commercial. Musical accolades are all well and good, but I think what Wayne was most proud of was the fact that he was able to overcome his personal trials of drugs and jail time. He emerged from this darkness transformed, and then went on to save countless lives through his tireless acts of service. He was extremely passionate about his work with Jail Guitar Doors, a program that provides guitars and musical lessons for inmates at more than 50 penal institutions throughout the United States. Through the years, he regularly played concerts with an all-star band at prisons around the country. During this interview from January 6, 2022, we talked about why musicians from Detroit have a special edge to them, why the MC5 was banned from radio, how going to prison saved his life, getting into film scoring, and much more. This is a replay of an interview that I did with Wayne from his studio in Los Angeles. Let's go back to the beginning. I want to hear about you getting in the music business. Was the MC5 your first band?
No, I was in a few kind of neighborhood garage bands that performed at kids' parties and school dances and that kind of stuff, where everybody starts. You can read anyone's memoir, and they're all the same.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. We all start exactly the same way, or did. I'm not so sure it's the same way now, but back then everybody did.
I agree. It's different now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, my mother dated a musician, and we had a couple family friends that were professional musicians, and I was just intrigued with them, because they lived in another world. They worked at night. They slept all day, and they were always talking about crazy shit that happened at the club last night. And my mother warned me. She said, I want you to do what you want to do, Wayne. But this business about being a musician, this is a hard life. First, you got to work at night, usually, and you sleep all day. And there's drugs and alcohol, and there are loose women.
Yeah, like that's a problem, right?
And she told me true.
Well, let's move up to the MC5. How did that start?
Well, the neighborhood band thing evolved as I met more musicians around the Detroit area. And I just, I wanted to have a band. I tried to join other people's bands, but I was always like the youngest guy at the audition, and the older cats could all play better than me. Like in those days, you had to know Hideaway.
Oh, yeah.
Honky Tonk. You had to know Ventures tunes. And, I could play it a little bit. I knew some of them, but it just seemed like there were always guys that were better than I was. So I said, the better path will be, let's start my own band. And I looked around at school for other kids that wanted to be in a band with me. And eventually that evolved into what we know as the MC5, which I'm still in.
Yeah, I guess you can't get away, right?
I'm a lifer.
The interesting thing to me there's a couple of things. First of all, the musicians that come from Detroit have a special edge to them. And I'm not sure what it is. Maybe you can explain it better.
Well, this is just my thesis, that first, we all knew that Motown recording band was right over on West Grand Boulevard. And I would see those guys at the music store, Jamerson and Bob Babbitt would come in, and everyone would hang out at the music store. The music store was like the bodega, the musicians' neighborhood hangout. And, we all listened to what they were recording and what they were playing, and they set the bar very high. And we all, or at least I, aspired to play at the level that they played. And, there's the working class mentality in Detroit. And in the late 50s and up through the 60s, Detroit was a boom town. The auto industry was raging, and there were good union jobs that a guy could raise a family and go on vacation and buy a house that had a two and a half car garage.
Mm-hmm.
So parents could afford to buy their kids electric guitars on a payment plan from Sears. My first proper solid body electric guitar was a Sears Silvertone. I think it was $125, and I was thrilled to death. So it was a fertile ground. Radio was fantastic in those days in Detroit. And you could hear just such a broad range of music. The Southerners that moved up from the South after World War II for those good auto jobs brought their culture with them. So there was country radio. The rhythm and blues radio stations were fantastic. There was jazz radio and pop radio. And it was all first rate and very competitive and regional. It was territorial. So it just created an atmosphere. And I think the capper is that there were a vast number of nightclubs that had live music. The auto industry went 24/7. These are a lot of young guys with good money in their pockets. They want to go out and meet girls, have a drink, and that means 7 days a week. So, when I first started working in bars, we played 5 sets a night, and sometimes 5 days a week, 6 days a week. I mean, that's where I kind of learned how to own the stage and, say, look, this is my place of business here. This is my job.
Yeah, I get it. I went through the same thing where when I was in high school, as a matter of fact, I was playing 4 nights a week by the time I was 15.
Yeah.
And you could because there's just so much work around.
Yeah. Where did you grow up?
Pennsylvania.
Uh-huh.
Middle of Pennsylvania, coal country.
Yeah. So the steel mills were in full operation, and, people had money and they wanted to go out. And
yeah, it's a different time. Okay, so the MC5, I remember when I was growing up, I would see all sorts of press on the MC5, reading the, whatever magazines I can get on music magazines. You guys were always in it somewhere. And yet it was difficult to hear your music.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the deal there? What happened?
Well, we were effectively banned from the radio. We had finally secured a recording contract with Elektra Records, had a fantastic regional following. We could put 2,000 kids into the Grandy Ballroom without an album, without a hit record, just on the strength of our live performances. And when we released Kick Out the Jams, we, of course, knew that Kick Out the Jams Motherfucker would never be a hit single. I mean, we weren't stupid. And so we released a clean version, Kick Out the Jams Brothers and Sisters. And the record shot up the charts. It was number 2 in Detroit. It was on NEW in New York. It was number 6 in Chicago. And the rating services at the time, you remember, they had the Gavin Report and the Drake Report. And if they picked this single, all the radio stations would take their guidance and play the record. And they all picked, they said, the band has a great live show. They're a little bit controversial, but they're exciting. And, this record is going to explode. Well, Elektra Records rushed the album out. See, we had a plan. The plan was let the single get as high in the charts as it's going to get. Wait till it's coming down, then release the album, because the album version would be the motherfucker version. But we would have had a bona fide hit record, and they couldn't stop us. We knew the shit was going to hit the fan when the parents and teachers and police and prosecutors started hearing motherfucker.
Yeah.
And Elektra said, a great plan. We like it. Then when the single took off, they rushed the album out. And when they did that, the shit hit the fan. Parents came home from work listening to, what are you listening to? What is that? Oh, it's this new album by the MC5. Oh, no. And, kids were arrested for selling the record, And Elektra said, we'll back you. We think you have the right to say what you want as artists. This is a First Amendment issue. And the rating services said, get off of the MC5 record. The album has an obscenity on it. And, this is really bad for your station. And they effectively crushed the campaign.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's why you didn't hear it on the radio.
Yeah. Was that kind of like the beginning of the end of the band?
It was the beginning of the end. Yeah, it really broke our stride. Everything was falling into place, and that just put a dark cloud over the band. And then Elektra, asked us, could they put out a clean version of the album? And, in those days, they had this thing where, artists all of a sudden had power. And we were in our contract. It said we could approve all the advertising. We had the right to say what we wanted to say. We had the final approval on the mixes. And they said, can we put out a clean version? And we said, absolutely not. And they went back to New York and did it anyway, and then fired us from the label.
Typical label stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and Atlantic picked up the band. It was Jerry Wexler's parting shot. Here, guy, I'm going to leave you a little something to remember me by. Here, have the MC5.
Oh, boy.
They had no idea what to do with us. They were an R&B label, and but they were record men, and they saw that there was going to be a fortune waiting in this white rock world, that this was blowing up. The ballroom circuit was all over the country, and bands were, able to tour, and, this was going to be big. And I think they saw us as the archetype American hard rock band, which we were. But they didn't know how to promote us, and they didn't know what to do. And John Sinclair, my dear friend and our manager, at that point was sentenced to 9.5 to 10 years in prison for possession of 2 joints of marijuana. And so we had no interlocutor between us and the music industry. And we were crazy. I mean, we were unmanageable. And so our relationship with Atlantic went in the toilet, and we tried a couple other managers. And by 1972, we couldn't work. We're all starving. And, there's no money changing hands. Things can get tough real quick.
Yeah. And it did for you, and then you got your own sentence to prison, which changed your life in many ways, I know. And especially, I think, later on in life, you appreciated it. I don't know if you can appreciate it. That's not the right word, but you understood what you came through with.
To some degree, yeah. It's a traumatic thing. The first time you go to prison, I have an understanding of the experience now, and what my fellows go through as well. What the 2.5 million of our fellow citizens are going through in America's prisons.
Well, let's jump ahead now, because I want to talk about Jail Guitar Doors. And it seems appropriate to get into this now because it's one of the things that in fact, the good that came out of it, I think.
It was, yeah. I mean, listen, I can say this, going to prison most likely saved my life. I was drinking and drugging to excess. I'd overdosed a number of times, and I was inhabiting a world that was very dangerous. In that time period in the city of Detroit, we had 900 murders. So guns and crime were out of control, and people were killed left, right, and center. And, I came too close to being murdered myself a couple times. Had I not gone to prison, I don't doubt that I wouldn't have made it many more years. I mean, it was just too dangerous. The behavior was third-degree game playing.
So jailhouse doors jail guitar doors came about.
It's hard to say. It's awkward on the tongue. Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, in the MC5, we had a political consciousness. We had developed that, and we made it part of the art that we created. We had this belief that who you were, what you believed in, should be part of your whole life, in your work, in your family, in your friends, that these things aren't separate, that they're all part of one way to be. And so I've always had a more than an interest or a fascination, maybe an obsession with why things are the way they are. And I think that I share that with a lot of people. And after I came home from prison, I was in denial about it for a couple decades. I didn't want to tell stories about it. I didn't talk about it. I mean, if someone asked, I would talk about it. If I ran into someone else that had done time, we could talk about it. But it freaked people out. You start talking about your time in prison. In normal white society, it's beyond the pale. But when I finally started to think about it and realize that, what we were doing in America was unprecedented, that we were locking up more people than any nation in the history of the world. I mean, when I went down, there were 350,000 people in prison in the nation, 300 in the state systems and 50,000 in the federal system. And today it's 2 million, with some hundreds of thousands in the federal system and the rest in the states. And I was tracking as the prison populations would go up further and further every year. And it pissed me off. It really made me angry at the establishment, the power structure, the government. What's going on, guys? Am I the only one that can see this? Something's terribly wrong here. And so what can I do? Well, I'm of the belief that one person can make a difference. A few people working together can make a huge difference. I mean, look, Hitler almost took over the world with about 15 guys. So one guy could make a difference. What could I do? Well, I'm a musician. I played music in prison. It was very important. I always enjoyed it when bands from the street would come into our prison and put on a show for us. It was terrific. So I thought, okay, I could do concerts in prisons. Maybe, give the guys some entertainment, give them some relief for an hour, let them escape prison for an hour and be at a rock concert. And one of the concerts I did at Sing Sing in New York, the infamous maximum security prison. And I rounded up a bunch of my rock star friends, Tom Morello, Jerry Cantrell, Gilby Clarke, Handsome Dick Manitoba, Don Was, who's the singer in Jane's Addiction? Perry Farrell. Perry and his wife, Etty. And one of the other musicians I invited was Boots Riley was Billy Bragg, the great British troubadour and activist. And we were getting ready to go play, and he got his guitar out, and I'd been working on trying to get a better live electric acoustic sound. My guitar always sounded crappy to me, and his guitar always sounded luxurious and full and crisp. And so he got his guitar out, and it said Jail Guitar Doors on it. And I said, "What's up with that?" And he said, "Oh, it's an old Clash B-side. Have you ever heard it?" And I said, "Heard it? They wrote the song about me, Billy." And he said, "What you mean?" And I said, "Well, what are the lyrics?" He said, "Right. Let me tell you about wine and his deals of cocaine. Bloody fucking hell, it is about you. I'd forgotten all about it." So he went on to tell me that he had launched an independent initiative in England to celebrate Joe Strummer's life's work. And he called it Jail Guitar Doors, named after that B-side. And he provided guitars for use in prisons in prisoner rehabilitation. So the more we talked about it, and we played the show and had a great event at Sing Sing. And then on the ride back, on the bus back to the city, we just kept talking and talking and talking. And finally, I said, "Billy, this is pretty cool. You do this in England, you're British, but I'm American. I'm an ex-convict, and I'm a musician. I want to take this on in this country." And he said, "Good, because I was just going to task you with it." He said, "You're the only one that can do it. You've been inside. You know how the system works." And I said, "That's true." So my wife, Margaret Kramer, Billy Bragg, and I founded Jail Guitar Doors USA almost 13 years ago now. And today we've grown and we've learned and we've expanded. Our instruments are in over 200 American correctional facilities, and we run programs around the country at Rikers Island in New York, in the Cook County Jail in Chicago, in the Michigan Department of Corrections, in Florida, the Florida Department of Corrections, in Utah, in Arizona, and we run programs here in California. We're in 11 California prison yards, and we run songwriting workshop programs where we help people learn how to express complex, painful feelings and memories in songs, in art. It helps them. First thing it does is it makes them feel better about themselves, because we all carry this stuff around with us. And if we can get it out into the sunshine, it takes the power out of it. I haven't met a prisoner yet that didn't have something really terrible happen to him as a child. I did too. They all want to talk about that. I want to talk about it. We all want to be recognized. We want our story heard by someone. And so we give them that opportunity. We show them how that can be done in a non-confrontational way, in a positive way, in a way that adds some beauty to the world, that contributes something of value to the world, that the prison has nothing to do with the prison. They can't take it away from you. You can't buy this. You can only get it by doing the actions, by demonstrating it. They learn to collaborate with people that they wouldn't normally hang out with. In our workshops, we do not allow and do not recognize gang affiliations, racial differences, sexual preferences, class preferences. We're all artists in our workshop. And prison politics stays out on the yard. And the men love it, and the women love it, and the kids love it, because in our workshops, they just get to be people. They just get to be natural, regular guys, and we can talk about anybody and anything, but we have to treat each other with dignity and respect. And there can be no racial humor, no sexist humor. And we really work hard to the business of lyrics. The popular form that music takes today is rap. And there's a lot of banging on the mic. And, we tell people, if your story includes violence, then tell your story. But tell the whole story. Because the fact that violence enters your life does not make you a hero, doesn't make you a man amongst men, because there's always a downside to it. Someone in your clique betrayed you, or you wouldn't be in prison. Someone did you wrong. Tell the truth. Talk about that stuff. Talk about the stuff that didn't go right. Tell the truth. Tell the whole truth. Because we don't, I've heard motherfucker this and motherfucker that and bitch this and bling. Who cares? It's been played to death. I want guys to work harder to come up with meaningful lyrics. Women are in prison. There are women everywhere. There are women correctional officers. In California, there's a lot of women wardens, and you can't disrespect them, or else there's not going to be any program.
Yeah.
And they know that. So they follow our guidance. And the world is so much bigger. For example, we give them a theme to write on at each session. Say today we're going to write about kids, children. And I've got a black gangster over here. And over there I've got a norteño. And we're writing about kids. And you find out they both want the same thing for their kids. And they find out that each other wants the same thing for their kids. And they connect. They connect in a way that they could never connect on the yard. They see that this other guy, he might have a different color skin, but we're all the same.
Yeah, I can see how powerful that is. I do have a question for you. One more, and then I want to move on. Recently, there was an interview with Tom Morello, and it was about one of the gigs he did with you. In it, and I don't recall exactly how he said it, but the gist of it was he was really impressed with how well you communicated with the inmates and how you could talk to them and they understood and you were talking their language. My question is, you were in a long time ago, so we're talking decades here. Is the language still the same? Has that evolved, or once you're in, you're always in? Is that the way that works?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, doing time, the fundamentals stay the same. Language is a living thing, and it'll evolve as it does out here in the free world, and new slang enters the lexicon. But still, a bit is a bit, meaning my sentence, my bit. Guards are hacks. Guards are COs. Guards are the police. That doesn't change. Prisoners, when I was in, we were inmates. When I was released, I was an ex-convict. Then I became an ex-offender. And today I'm a returned citizen. It's all the same.
Yeah, I get it. Okay.
I mean, returned citizen is preferable.
Yeah.
But, doing time is a world that, even if you just did a year or 6 months, things that regular people don't know. I read a study once that said for a first-time offender, they will absorb the entirety of their accountability in 6 months away from their world, their life, incarceration for 6 months. Anytime after that, you're just warehousing them. So for first-time offenders, they're going to learn whatever lesson is to be learned in 6 months.
Interesting.
Sentencing has reflected the worst of American political power dynamics. For example, when I was sentenced, I received a 4-year regular adult sentence from the judge with a 3-year special parole term on top of it, which meant if I was paroled and I served 2 years and 29 days and was rearrested on the 29th day, I would have to go back to prison and serve those 3 years over again. You don't get credit for your street time. I know men today who are serving life without the possibility of parole for the exact same crime that I pled guilty to, trafficking controlled substances. So the sentencing just went through the roof. I mean, people are doing just unbelievable amounts of time. It's and I complained about the 4 years then. I thought that was severe. And it is. For a first-time nonviolent offender, 6 months would have taught me everything that I needed to know about changing my antisocial attitudes and behaviors.
I want to touch on some other things here because you had a most interesting life. Tell me about the punk scene in New York City when you got involved after prison, because MC5, they were proto-punk. That's the prototype. So you must have been quite revered, I would think, in New York.
Amongst the community of musicians, I mean, a lot of people, most guys that play in bands, they study other bands and who influenced who, and if they connect the dots back far enough, they'll come to the MC5 and the Stooges, and so I was, but I think I didn't get there till the early 80s, and I think it had kind of peaked by then. And I was not in the best of shape myself. I had resumed my use of narcotics, and I was drinking again. I didn't help my cause.
Yeah. Let's jump ahead. Film and television, you've done a lot of that. So how did you get into it, first of all?
Well, I moved to Los Angeles. This is where they do that. They make movies and TV shows here. So you got to be in the neighborhood, I believe. And
did you move specifically for that?
Yeah, because I was in my late 40s, and getting in the van just didn't quite have that excitement that it used to have, and doing another tour of Canada or, the South or something, playing these punk rock shitholes. I'll do it, okay. And I signed to a punk rock label, Epitaph Records. So, I'm back in it, and I'm out there, humping the boonies in a van with 3 or 4 other smelly dudes, and we're playing one-nighters across Europe and across the United States. And, and I said, man, I don't want to do this forever. Is there a way out? And I remembered that I had always had an interest in scoring for film and television. In fact, one day when I was in prison, I was in with a great jazz artist, a jazz trumpeter named Robert Chudnik. He was known as Red Rodney. He replaced Miles Davis in the Charlie Parker Quintet.
Wow.
And he was in his late 50s then, and we were watching the ball game, the basketball, and a Uniroyal tire came on, and he said, Wayne, you hear that trumpet? I said, no, Red, I'm not hearing the trumpet. He said, there's a trumpet on there. That's me. I said, no shit.
Wow.
Man, I'd like to do that. And he said, oh, you will. When your music, the style of music you play, when that becomes popular, you'll be doing commercials. I filed that away. So I'm living in LA, and I've got a great manager, this young woman who's really a hustler, and she's meeting people that work at the networks and the music departments and that kind of stuff. And one day she asked me if I want to have lunch. She's going to have lunch with a girl that's the head of music at Fox Sports. Sure. So we go and we're just talking at lunch, and she says, I got this idea. I need a song that is for NASCAR, but I want it to be about the guys that work in the pits. So we're eating, and I'm thinking, I said, well, let's see, how about a A quitter never wins and a winner never quits, but the heart of every champion is working in the pits. That's brilliant. Could you write that up? I said, sure. I went home and I demoed the thing up and sent it over to her. And she said, they didn't use it, but they had a new show and would I like to try to write the theme? Of course. And the show was called 54321. It was an extreme sports show when skateboarding and BMX and all that was emerging. And the show hit, found an audience right away, and they ran it like 5 times a day. It was in the early days of cable, which was incredible payments for me. Like, you know, every quarter I would get a check for a pile of money. I said, geez, this is great. You know, let's go buy some gear. Let's buy more computers, you know. So that started going well. And then one day a friend, the dearly departed Hal Wilner, called me up and said he was working on a movie and it had some car racing in it. And the composer they had on the film wasn't getting it. And he told the director, you know, what you need is like a guy like Wayne Kramer, who's like, can play aggressive rock guitar. So they called me and asked me, and I said, sure, I think I can do that for you. And I went over and I met the director and I met the composer and we all talked. And so I started writing some cues for them. And I wrote all the race scenes in Talladega Nights. And the director was my dear friend, Adam McKay. And, you know, Adam is left of left politically and very, very militant and active. And so we just connected like, you know, we were brothers. And so he included me on other things that came up, and I ended up scoring HBO's Eastbound and Down, which was another hit. And so, you know, I got lucky. I found some jobs that I could do, and they allowed me to learn the craft of scoring. And I took classes. I took classes at UCLA on the orchestra and the articulations, and film scoring classes at the Union. I took some courses and tried to do, you know, all composers have to study. You have to learn the language of music and the theory of music and how chords are constructed and how melodies are harmonized. And so, you know, I know a little bit about that stuff today, and I'm able to, you know, I didn't work much during the first round of the pandemic, but things have picked up quite a bit now. I'm doing a film here, and then I've got another one I'm working on that's just halted production for a while. So I've been very fortunate, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome, Wayne. Awesome.
It's tricky stuff because, you know, having been leading rock bands all my life really didn't prepare me for this kind of work. And in the end, the music is the easiest part of it. It's the fun part. The hard part is dealing with human beings, directors, producers. That's the hard part, you know, managers, agents. That's the hard work. And it's not for everybody. Like, you know, if I want to make a record, I call you up and I call up 2 or 3 of my friends and say, let's go in the studio. I wrote these songs. We'll cut them. Yeah, great. Here's my record. It's done. It doesn't work like that in film and TV. It's not my music. It's not my idea. It's the director. It's the creator's idea. My job is to help him or her tell their story. I work for them. And there's a thing called notes. I write the music, I send it over, and they send me notes. Yeah, Wayne, we love it. It's perfect. But could you just change the middle part and change the ending? And oh yeah, change the beginning. And I look at them and say, absolutely, I'm on it. I'm taking care of it. And not everybody can do that. It rubs against the grain, especially if you come from the band world.
Yeah, definitely. Last question for you. Thank you. You've been so generous with your time. We can go on and on. I love talking to you. This is great. And we can talk on so many other subjects, I'm sure. What's the best piece of advice that someone maybe imparted to you, or maybe something that you learned along the way?
Brush after every meal.
That's important.
Yeah, I think so. And floss. I have an 8-year-old son, and it's, son, did you brush? Yeah, I brushed. Did you floss?
Yeah.
You know, I'm always looking for wisdom. I'm looking for how to make better choices, how to act in a more human way, in a more productive way, in a kinder way to myself and to the people around me. So, you know, you can learn a little piece of information and try to incorporate that into who you are and demonstrate that in the day you're in. And then you're looking for another piece of information. So I don't know that I learned some big lessons in the 12-step program. I've been clean and sober for all day now. And
one day at a time, right?
They taught me a few things. If I don't lie, I'm not a liar anymore. If I don't steal, I'm not a thief anymore. If I don't play people, then I'm not a creep anymore. These were big lessons for me to learn as a grown-up. I didn't stop drinking and drugging till I was 50 years old. I'm 73 now. And those pieces of advice served me well, to try to understand what the principle of humility means, to learn that I am no better than anyone else and no worse than anyone else, that I'm a fellow amongst fellows. I'm a worker amongst workers. I used to have a lot of trouble with this kind of stuff because I thought that my shit was divine. I was gifted, I was inspired, and my ideas were better than everybody else's. Because I'm a free jazz fan, and I study James Brown, and I know more about music than anybody else does, and my taste, and I was just a complete asshole, total complete asshole. So to learn that I work in an industry with a lot of other people that work in this industry, and we all do the best we can, that I am imperfect, and I will remain imperfect all my days. That I'm not going to get it right. I'm going to blow it, but I know what to do when I blow it. I know how to apologize. I know how to make an amends. I know how to keep my side of the street clean. So those things have been big learning experiences for me. I'm leery of my own counsel. I try to listen and learn from people that know better than me, and most everybody does.
You can find out more about Jail Guitar Doors at jail-guitar-doors.myshopify.com. That's jail-guitar-doors.shopify.com. Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. To listen to the episodes of Bobby Owsinski's Inner Circle, go to bobbyowsinski.com and select the podcast tab, or go to bobbyoinnercircle.com, or you can find an Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Mixcloud, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, TuneIn Radio, Radio Public, and Podbean. At bobbyowsinski.com and bobbyoinnercircle.com, you'll also find a sign-up form for my newsletter and for alerts for new podcasts. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.